Hello and welcome to Spare a Thought. My name is Tom Spare, your host. In each episode of this podcast, I interview interesting people and organisations who are doing important work in areas of society that are often misrepresented or underreported in the media. This episode is the third in a trio focused on international university students. In part one, I interviewed Julie Campbell, where we talked about the challenges that international students face before, during, and after their studies. In part two, I interviewed four former international students and one current student to talk about their experience of university. You can find those episodes where you found this one. For this episode, I spoke to Tanya Thomas, a partner at Spencer West Solicitors. Tanya specialises in higher education disputes and dispute resolution. We talked about the kind of issues students bring to Tanya when their experience at university goes awry, the unique challenges faced by international students, and what steps students can take to resolve their complaints. So let's spare a thought for international students, part 3.
I'm Tanya Thomas. I'm a partner at Spencer West Solicitors, and I deal solely with higher education dispute resolution. Your question about why I became a lawyer did make me laugh. It's not because I wanted, to be at the forefront of justice, cutting edge, and changing people's lives. It pretty much because when I joined the profession, there weren't very many women in it, and I was it was the 80s, and I was just really into power dressing. I just thought, I can sit in an office wearing a nice beige suit with a pot plant, and that is my reason. That is the reason why I went into law, Tom. I'm so sorry.
I think that is the most fabulously honest answer I've ever had from anyone, so I really appreciate that.
I wanted big hair, shoulder pads, heels. I was very, very frivolous, but it turned out better than that. I don't
Okay.
think I ever owned a beige suit, sadly.
And what brought you into higher education?
Quite by accident. It was an accident. I used to do family law. I did family law for about 10, 15 years. I kept waiting for that moment where it was like, I love this, I got this. That never happened. So civil legal aid was withdrawn, and I think 20,000 family lawyers got made redundant overnight. I was one of those. And so I got myself a job in student union as a student advisor. I had no idea about the kind of issues that students faced. I was fascinated by university regulations, and I think my background as a lawyer made me feel that students weren't really getting a fair deal, that when it came to problems, things going wrong, they weren't really getting very good advice. And the universities weren't being very transparent, and I felt that they needed a bit more of a stronger type of representation, which I think is what I did and crafted over those 3 years until I left and went into private practice. And that's where I've been ever since.
You went to university via your training, I'm guessing.
No, I did. I went to university and I did a degree in French, first of all, and then I had this random idea that I'd become a lawyer. So I did my law conversion course and legal practice course at university.
I guess you had a sense from that experience of what university might be like, but then did you have a perception of how universities were run before you joined, or you just sort of went into it and didn't really have
Yeah, I think there was this sort of, power imbalance that you just had to do everything you were told. A large part of what I do now is helping students with disabilities who are disadvantaged in some way. And I was actually pregnant with my first child when I was doing my legal practice course. Hugely disadvantaged for a number of reasons. I was physically unwell. It was mentally quite exhausting. And I didn't get any adjustments at all. And when I told my tutors that I was pregnant, they said, well, don't worry, our pregnant students tend to do really well. And that was it. That was the sum total of the support I got.
And so when you then arrived in the university sector, what were the sort of main issues that were being brought to students about their university experience? And has that changed over time?
A lot of academic appeals. So academic appeals is the big one. This is the one where, you've either been terminated or you have to repeat the year or whatever. You can't progress because something went wrong in the exam. And that hasn't changed. That is still the bulk of my work and the type of things that I work incredibly hard to try and resolve, because those can be life altering in terms of outcomes for students. So that hasn't changed at all. Complaints, I think, yeah, I think complaints are on the increase. So we would get some complaints, and disciplinaries are the other ones. So the main areas that I see kind of like where there's an increase is in the sort of complaints to do with complaints against about service, disciplinaries, particularly in relation to whatever happens to be current. Right now, it's AI, use of AI and plagiarism. And I always feel that students get a raw deal because the threshold in terms of the evidence needed to prove that they did something is incredibly low. So someone only needs to have a suspicion and a bit of a kind of like a gut feeling that this person cheated, and that's it. And sometimes it can be the end of their career.
The point you make about AI and how quickly or slowly universities react to the world around them is probably a really good point to make, because
they act quickly. Sorry to interrupt you, but they act quickly, but it's not often well thought out.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. They're slow-moving beasts, but very speedy when need to be. And usually when it comes to defending their reputation or their brand. So
I agree, but there has to be some fairness built into that. So on the way, there has to be a balance between, not undermining the academic integrity of a student, but then not accusing absolutely everybody of procuring work through an essay mill. There's got to be a balance. At the moment, it's AI. Students are coming to me saying, look, I'm really worried. They've accused me of this. I gave them all my drafts. That's the best I could do to prove I didn't do it. And then they said, no, we still think you did it. And so the students will say, I'm so worried that they'll just do it to me again. So I've got no option to withdraw. It doesn't seem to be any kind of measure in terms of, yes, it's where are our criteria? What do? We just go, oh, that's what we think, therefore we have to punish you in some way.
In 2023, there were 3,137 complaints received by the Office of the Independent Adjudicator in England and Wales, and that was around a 10% increase from the year before. That seems like a small number. Can you tell us more about that number? Why that number is so small?
So these are formal complaints. These are complaints that have got to the formal stage and haven't been resolved, and they go to the OIA. I don't think a lot of people know about the OIA. Yes, they do. They get it on their final letter and they look at it and they think, what's that? Sometimes they've left the university and they can't be bothered. And sometimes if they're on a course, they're particularly medics, they won't raise complaints whilst they're still in medical school, because they have this fear of suffering detriment. And no matter what the university promises, that will be a factor in deciding whether to pursue a complaint. I just think that's a woefully small number. I've absolutely no idea why more students aren't complaining. And I think, do you know what I think it is? It's because when you use the internal complaint system, the chances of getting your complaint upheld are so small that by the time you get to the end of it and you're going to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator, you've lost the will to live, because you're effectively asking the university to police its own university. It's not going to uphold your complaint, is it? So the whole complaint system has got this sort of this bias in it. And, I've dealt with so many complaints that the client's been right, they've been properly articulated, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And then you get to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator, and the adjudicator says sometimes, oh, we think the complaint was handled properly. Okay, that's devastating. Or it says your complaint isn't upheld because of some random reason. And so the student just gets completely confused and also potentially timed out for making, legal claims. So, but particularly judicial review. So I just think the whole system is really, really confusing that you'll be given signals along the way whether your complaint has merits or not, and you'll just be dissuaded, and you'll have other reasons such as suffering detriment why you won't want to pursue anything. And most of the complaints that even get to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator stage, you're looking at compensation in hundreds, even from the most awful distress and inconvenience that's lasted for years, that's caused you to have psychological breakdown. You'll be lucky if you walk away with £750. So I don't know what the system is doing for students. It's not, certainly not delivering the types of remedies that they would expect in any other sort of consumer situation. It is very peculiar.
There was a jump in 2023 of 43% of complaints amongst European and international students. What are the sort of issues that they're raising, and how are they different from sort of home students?
I think international students do have it's a much more challenging experience studying in the UK, because often students have feelings of being homesick, coupled with maybe undiagnosed mental health problems they've had for a long time, and due to stigma or whatever, haven't been able to get help for. So mental health and loneliness is something I see very often in international students, and often completely then they don't know how to reach out for support, because say where their home country is, that's not really regarded as being something that is encouraged. So I see that a lot. I also see that international students tend to be accused of cheating much more frequently than home students. And so you get this awful combination of a student accused of academic misconduct who's feeling incredibly lonely and homesick, and as a result of that suffers in terms of their mental health, and everything just becomes much, much, much harder for them. Yeah, so I think mental health is a big issue when it comes to international students, and how they are supported when they come to university in the UK.
And there's that element of the pressure that international students are on to deliver academically, which is, there's a lot more at stake for international students.
There can be, yeah, there can be. I mean, only anecdotally, I know this, that, some people say that if, from you're a certain country, that if you fail and go back, then you'll be subject to, financial penalties and all sorts of things. I don't know. I think most international students, and some of them I do feel under pressure to achieve, and that sometimes they try and seek my help when they haven't disclosed to their parents and their family that they've been accused of academic misconduct, because of the concern that it would bring, shame on the family, sort of thing. So I think the difficulties, yeah, I do think that they face far more challenges than home students, and also they've paid a lot more. I think it's very difficult for them, and I don't find the universities very supportive when it comes to a student saying, I'm homesick, and that's not treated as if it's sort of genuine. More like it's, well, you just need to man up a bit. That's not an excuse, but there is a real, that is a mental health issue. If you're feeling isolated and lonely, and you have social anxiety, and you can't leave the house, and you're worried about questioning things with your tutors and clarifying things, then that is a real barrier, isn't it, to your success?
Do you think international students know what they're signing up for when they come to the UK?
I don't know. I don't know if I'd be able to generalise, because some international students will have, studied all around the world, won't they, before they come to the UK, and some have never left their home countries. So it's very difficult to say. If you were to buy a car, let's say that costs 20 grand, which is roughly the price of a master's year for an international student, and then that car doesn't work because there's something fundamentally wrong with it, or they said to you it was a petrol car, actually turned out to be diesel, or you had an accident and couldn't drive it, and they say that's fine, we'll take the car off you, but we won't give you your money back. If you want anything, you have to go to this kind of third party over here, and then you have to sort of tell them everything that's happened. If they believe you might get a couple of £100. Oh, and you're not getting your car, and you're not getting any money. And that's pretty much what happens to students. I think there is a lot of complexity around complaints. So I predominantly deal with academic appeals, but underpinning those appeals are complaints. The students quite often don't go on to pursue those complaints because A, they're exhausted, and B, they realise they're not going to get anywhere because what they truly want is that academic remedy. So the kind of patterns and trends that I'm seeing are an increase in either a failure in disability adjustments, and by that I mean any sort of adjustment for a disability, be that a physical disability or a mental health issue or a specific learning disability. Some those hidden disabilities are the ones that tend to cause more problems in universities because they still, not all of them understand that those are still disabilities, even though they can't be seen necessarily. It's still a problem. So there's the failure in disability adjustments, and also there's the late diagnosis. So you've just done your exams, you did really badly, you've been having problems in certain areas, and it turns out you've got ADHD. You've been struggling with ADHD for a very long time. So it's the appeals then that we have to do based on the fact that that student wasn't able to demonstrate their academic ability, and that somehow those results got skewed, and can we have another reset? So those, I would say, is like a massive thing at the moment. I've lost count of the number of students I've represented with autism spectrum disorders and ADHD who've been in that position, but it's certainly, and it's growing. And I'm having the same arguments with institutions up and down the country. It's not like it's just one that's being difficult. A lot of them don't recognise A, that they're disabilities, and B, that if there is an adjustment and the adjustment has failed, then that exam should be null and void. So sadly, yeah, still got a lot of work to do.
So that seems like a structural thing across the whole across the sector in terms of not recognizing hidden disabilities, which surprises me a little bit, I guess. But there again, I spent a big chunk of my career on the student support side, so I was seeing people working very hard behind the scenes to try and, change university policies and also support students at the same time. How much is it to do with the universities themselves, but also how much do you think it relates to being able to pick up those symptoms, those signs earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think there are people in the background working very hard, trying to improve policy. You have disability support, but nothing's joined up. There are institutions whereby there isn't any connection. There is no connectivity between these various parts. I just did a hearing for a student, and on that hearing, I had to explain to the panel that when a student discloses a disability to one person in the university, unless they say that that information is to be kept confidential, the university, as a legal entity, is now on notice that person has a disability. They were astonished. They'd never heard of that before. So it's almost like they've created these departments, student support, disability, and they say to the student, off you go, there you go for your advice. But that information that very specialised information that is held by disability support, yes, they do a good job. They do the reports. They send the student away with the support plan. Is not shared. It's not disseminated amongst the wider university. So that when something does go wrong, people don't go, that's why it went wrong, because when you did that, I didn't do that, I didn't do that. There's no ownership of the problem. I don't feel that disability matters should just sit within the disability support service. Everybody should have training, refresher training, basic stuff, so everybody is aware of it. So that, as you said, so they can identify where there's a problem and say, that student had just said that, I need to go and figure that out. The number of times, I've lost count the number of times that university has said to a student who has said, I'm really struggling, my mental health is poor, I think I might have ADHD, and has sent them an email with a load of links in. Now, if you've got ADHD, you're not going to follow up on any of those links. It's not good enough just to signpost a student and give them a link and hope for the best. It's just something that it needs to be a bit more sophisticated than that. And then I think that would probably solve the majority of problems. It's not that people aren't willing or they don't care. They just don't understand because they've said, you don't have to worry. We tick that box. We've got a disability department, so we won't touch it now. I've had students to say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, that's not a disability. And they get so upset because it's just a lack of knowledge. But I
Mhm.
get that the university is a really big institution. You're talking about thousands of people. How do you do it? I mean, I don't know. That's not my problem. But that is the problem. That's what I've identified is where the majority of issues are
Yeah.
arising, is just through that lack of joined up thinking, lack of ownership, really.
And I suppose the scale of it is you've got 2.9 million students studying in the UK, 800,000 members of staff, academic and professional services supporting them. Yeah, it's a big industry, I suppose you could call it. It's a big sector. But definitely that siloed working, people not talking to one another, assumptions being made, technology being out of date. There are a whole host of different things that are involved in it.
Mm. And I think as well, when they get letters from me, so they get a letter from a lawyer, they get hyper defensive. They start having an argument with me about whether something is a certain way or it isn't. I've noticed, though, over the years that some of them are just not arguing with me anymore. It's almost like I have, just through sheer tenacity, re educated some of them. But I just wish they would just be more receptive and say, okay, this person is saying something to us. She wouldn't be saying that if there wasn't some truth. Let's check it out. But they don't. They keep it in the same department, and I get gobbledygook back about it. Very time consuming. Why not just go to your legal department and say, your lawyer, and say, just can you have a look at this? The problem is that the university is set up in a way that everything must be done internally, and we won't get lawyers involved until we do a letter before action or a letter of claim. And by then, there's all sorts of stuff flying left, right, and centre, all sorts of confusion. And I think really, come on, universe, just be open to it. Like, lawyers aren't bad people. We're just giving you our view, and so we're being as objective as possible. It would be really nice if we could speak to your lawyer about this and get this resolved in like a week rather than 3 years. But that's not happening. And the other thing is like, why wait till you've exhausted your procedure? Why wait until everybody's had X, Y, and Z panel and nobody knows what the point is anymore? Why not just go to mediation? Why not say we've got a problem here? We recognise that. We're not admitting liability, but perhaps we should go and sit down and have a chat about it. And for some reason, they're not doing that. I can see a point where they're going to have to do that because it's just going to get, they're going to be tied up with so many of these procedures and all of these ins and outs that it's going to make sense to them just to go for mediation. But yeah, I think something really needs to shift. I can't be going around, I can't be doing this for much longer, on a case by case basis, the same arguments for every single university. Some universities, like the 10th time, it's a bit
Mm.
wearing.
Mm.
There's just something not right.
Is there a uniform way in which students can complain against their universities, or is it very inconsistent? Does it depend on the personality of the university and the institution?
I think the majority operate on the in the same way, in that it's an informal complaint to the school or department, then a formal complaint, and then some sort of review panel. It's normally pretty uniform, I would say.
And just as a final one, do you have any advice to students when it comes to raising a complaint against the university?
I would do it as soon as possible and make sure that you've got, if you're thinking that something is going wrong, it probably is. So you need to be thinking about getting your evidence as the thing unfolds. And I know that sounds really, really kind of bleak and pessimistic, but that's the reality. Because if you've got any hope of getting your complaint even partially upheld, you're going to need to have a mountain of contemporaneous evidence, screenshots, trust me, things will go missing, and make a subject access request as soon as possible.
And what's the subject access request?
So it's a request so you contact your data protection officer in the university, you fill in a form and you say, okay, I want all of this information between this date and this date relating to, say, I don't know, a module, whatever, an incident that happened, or a member of staff, or between this member of staff and that member of staff. So you're going on a fishing exercise. So you've got to think of your parameters, think of the information that you want, that maybe you suspect members of staff have been discussing you or your case. And you can make a subject access request, and you are supposed to receive information, providing it contains your personal information about your case. And that can be very useful. The problem is the longer time goes on and the longer you delay making the subject access request, the less likely you can include information from the subject access request in your complaints. So I would recommend doing those as soon as possible. Yeah, particularly if it's over an incident or between a couple of members of staff, then you might want to be thinking about getting your evidence. Downside of a subject access request is it puts the institution on notice that you're up to something. And they'll quite often say, well, looks like he's lawyering up. He's getting his subject access request underway. But it's surprising the number of people that don't know that. Whenever I talk to students, I say, do a subject access request without, I think almost every single one has said, what's that? And the other thing they don't know about is judicial review. I say, have you thought about judicial review? Have you done an application to preserve your right to judicial review? And they go, no, what is that? I said, that is the thing they did not put on your completion of procedures letters. That's the thing that you must do now, so that when you finish with the OIA and everyone's so disappointed with the response, that you can still go to the High Court and get the whole thing looked at again. My guiding principles, and what I always say to my clients, like, if your gut instinct, you bother to pick up the phone or email me, your gut instinct is telling you something wasn't right. So let's explore that. And I would really encourage, and I'm not touting for business at all, but I would encourage you, if you ever are in a situation where something doesn't feel right, that you go and get independent advice, even if that is in your in-house legal service, your friends, your family. Don't take the university's word for it that, no, that's fine, you don't need to do it, or we'll sort it all out. Okay, always check it, because if your gut is telling you something is wrong, it probably is, and it could have life-altering consequences. So if it's a situation that could mean a difference between getting a 2-1 and a first, or having to withdraw from study altogether, or whatever, it matters and it's important. So get a second opinion. If your university is telling you, no, it's fine, we'll sort it out, that will never happen. They will never sort anything out for you. Get a second opinion.
Cool. Excellent advice. Well, thank you, Tanya, and thank you for your time. And
thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. So that's the end of this episode, Spare a Thought for International Students, Part 3. My thanks to Tanya for being such an insightful guest. This episode also concludes this mini-series focused on international students. I used to support international students myself, so I really enjoyed returning to this world and discussing the world of international students. It was great to hear about Julie's passion for caring for international students. I really enjoyed speaking to my peers about their experiences of moving to the UK, and also discussing with Tanya what happens when things go wrong for students, particularly international students. These 3 episodes go a long way in exploring the multifaceted nature of what international students experience and face at university. It does not tell the whole story, though. We could have said more about the exorbitant immigration costs, the eye-watering tuition fees, and the many scams that international students face while they're studying in the UK. I hope you've enjoyed my conversations with all my guests. I don't think I'm quite done yet on this subject, so when the time comes, I'll no doubt return. And just before I finish up today, I wanted to highlight a bit of self-promotion and say, along with the episodes that I'm creating for Spare a Thought for this podcast, I've also created a Substack, which I will be sharing the link for in the show notes. The Substack, which is a sort of microblogging site, will include posts which I'll be linking with the podcast, doing some deep dives on news stories that are often underreported or misrepresented by the media, taking a sort of fresh take on emerging issues and long-standing debates with articles, thought pieces, insights and interviews. So I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. It's all free to get the sort of latest posts that I'll be putting up there. So yeah, all in the show notes, but that was just the one final thing. Thanks for listening to this episode. The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow. Credit and thanks to Afrocluster, Magugu and Asher J. The show was researched, written and edited by myself, Tom Spare, with additional editing and production by Lily Mott. This has been a Be the Change Media Network production. Thanks for listening.
Young shall